All right, after the short break, we've now got Jim giving us a talk demo thing on a music programming language for musicians. So, thanks, Jim.
Great, thank you very much. Let's just get this thing rolling. So a wee while ago, I'm sitting there reading the news, and something popped up on Hacker News, which I don't often admit to reading, and it was a post that they'd found on the music programming language for musicians called Older, for the sort of people who like to use a text editor rather than anything else. Well, that's me, right? I can argue Vim versus Emacs, but I don't want to touch Sibelius. So it got me interested. I'm not promising there's no Rickrolling in here. That's to make up for the fact that I'm not a musician. Not really. Many, many years ago, I used to do a fair bit of music as a kid. I haven't touched it for a long time, basically since my voice broke. There was no point being. And then, of course, I didn't really want to be in the church at the same time either, so that was the end of my music career. But I was still interested in the subject. And you don't really need to see the license. But you can pick up a copy of all the slides at GitHub. We'll put it somewhere for you. So this thing, Older, popped up for me to have a look at. So it's a textual language to describe music. There are lots of those around. This is another one. It parses the music and it will play out onto your play a MIDI score out into your instrumentation. There's some limitations on that. We'll get there. You have an interactive session, so you can sit there and write stuff interactively and then ask it to save the score out, then chuck that into your text editor and play around with it, improve it, fix it, and play it again from there. So that's quite cool. It is very young. The development is very active as well. I saw it basically in September of last year. That's when the Hacker News post came out. It's been out before that, had a quick talk about it. As far as under development is concerned, I put this slide set up on GitHub, chucked it across to they're on slack.org, where they chat about all this thing. So the developer picked it up, said, yeah, like this, like that. This demo doesn't work, I'll fix this. That doesn't parse. I'll fix the parser. Parser fixed. My demo now works, thank you very much. This is in the author's words, just to call back to all of the other solutions to this type of problem which are out there. You always build on everybody else's great solutions. I'm not familiar with Chuck at all, but I understand that one does a lot of playback. I'm reasonably familiar with LilyPond because that's the one that does the rendering out into notation. That's the goal for this language. Dave Yarwood, who wrote it, has been creating music for a long time, and you know how it goes. Once you get the itch, everything is slightly wrong for the way you want to work, so obviously you've got to write your own code. So here's a bit of Older. Basically, you declare an instrument. You don't have to declare a tempo in there, but you can. But if you declare tempo, you declare what octave you're in, and then you start chucking in, it's a G, it's an eighth note, it's an accord with a D. Then there's a rest. Then there's a B flat, an accord with an F. And just keep going like that. And visually, it looks like a lot of other text-based music markup languages you've seen. There's a couple of differences in there. Can I play it back from here? I'm sure that's old enough to be available to copy now. It's on Wikipedia, right? The riff, so you were in business. That playback is recorded. That's an OGG file I recorded. That's not live at the moment because I couldn't figure out how to put the wonderful Reveal.js to actually play the damn thing live. And the sound that you hear is just the sound font that was on my machine at the time. You can change those. For the sake of going, oh yeah, I totally want to put the notes up so you can see how that relates, I had to go off and learn LilyPond, which I hadn't actually spent much time with. So there we go. Now LilyPond markup is looking very, very similar, but there's a few differences in there. We just go back up to the top one. Getting the representation from music notation and going up to Older is, yeah, it's not too difficult. So a couple of differences. Chords are a note is slash a note, not you have to angle bracket it to say what a chord is. The octave changes. So it's using, because he's got his MIDI output, your octaves change on your C. So C is always the lowest note in an octave. A and B are the higher notes. So you've got to remember to change your octaves based on a C, which is a rock curse for people that are used to doing it based on an A. But that's just code goes. And luckily, pitch, you can go, flat and sharp without using Dutch to do it, which is Lily Pond. I don't know why, but there we go. Sure, but I mean, my language settings say that I'm not Dutch. Never mind. Similar to lots of other systems, you set a setting for your note. You're specifying it's on the top on the note length. I specify a quarter for my C. I don't know the correct musical notation terms for it, so whether that's a crotchet. I thought that's what my grandma did with wool or something, but never mind. And that setting will say, yes, the next note will be one of those as well. Then we hit an eighth note. Yes, the next 3 notes following that will be the eighth note, and back again. And the same idea for changing octaves. So my octave setting there, I'm starting by declaring explicitly which octave am I in before I start. One of the problems with older being this big interpretive environment, it tends to say if you change up and down and don't say where you're starting from, next time you play the same line, it starts from down and then it goes up and down. That's not what I wanted. So get in the habit of explicitly declaring where you want to start. So starting on octave 4, I'll play a C and then I'll shift myself up 2 more. Well, you can see the notation. Oh, that sounded nice in this room. That's nice. I've been doing most of this through my laptop speakers, which sucks. If we declare in a score that we've got multiple voices with the same instrument, it will play them simultaneously. That's straightforward. And we sit there and say that's sort of a little bit difficult to read those 2 voices and say, see exactly where they're lining up and what's going on there. So we can stick white space in arbitrarily just to make things line up for us. The pipe symbol is your measure marker, your bar marker. That's complete. It's not completely ignored by the parser, but basically it doesn't mean anything to the parser. It means everything to the human. So then we can line up those notes and see a little bit better how they go. It's the same bit of music. I won't play it again. On the other hand, something which I don't think Lily Pond can do for my markup is that first chord could be a chord of 4 notes. Just the fact that one of them wasn't the same length as the others isn't going to stop us. So in here, I can declare in that very first section, it's C1, therefore E1 and a G1. The other C is only a quarter note. I can just say, one voice, you have different length notes in your chords. Hang on, I went the wrong way on that one. Exactly the same output, but from the programmer's perspective, this is possibly a better notation. Depends what you're thinking about at the time. If you were thinking of it in terms of these are different voices playing, then specify them as different voices and make them line up. If you're thinking of it in terms of what it's going to sound like, specify it this way, make it one voice, and specify the sound. So we get a little bit of choice in what we're doing. The other thing we can do, instead of lining things up by putting in lots of white space and marking them out, or in the case of this second voice here, putting in a big rest at the front, which may be somewhere way down by the end of your score. And if you're having to explicitly say how many rests I need to get to that trumpet voice at the end, and then I add a few more measures while I'm still scripting it, that's broken everything's alignment. In here, we just drop a marker. It doesn't really matter which voice we're on. While we're parsing voice 1, before you hit that E1 at the end, this is a marker called last note. As far as the trumpet's concerned, you'll be waiting until the event last note fires, and then you play through. So it makes it easy for you to say, this is where the verse comes in, this is where the chorus comes in for a piece, for a voice. And then you don't have to worry about how long it is before you get there. The notation's probably a bit ugly, but yeah, it seems to work. Now, some things are very difficult to express in just a couple of characters. So He's got a set of attributes that we can play. So the quantization and the volume can be played. So yeah, one of my examples, I think I made something sound staccato by just putting the note in half and sticking a rest after it. That was a bit nasty. Then I found out about this, and I thought, totally, this is the way to do it. So we play the first sequence, and then the second time it plays through, we'll make a couple of notes a bit more staccato, and the third time round, we'll try and change the volume of them at the same time. Now, unfortunately, volume from 80 to 99 actually wasn't that big a deal, but it might sound nice in here, so we'll see how we go. So again, you can start putting in stuff about the playback and making it happen. I don't know whether I quite got the notation right on the lily pond at the end there, but the general idea is for every note that you've got, you can control an awful lot of features about it. Because we're just chucking out MIDI, we've got the chance of throwing out percussion instruments as well. And he's got two different approaches to these. Obviously, we can play with the individual instruments that sound like they're percussion, like some of the woodblock type stuff. So they're just an ordinary instrument we can play with. And the other one is you can now talk to the percussion instrument itself, where each note is a different instrument. Again, this is going to depend on your font that's coming out there for sounds. But in here we've got... yeah, that bottom one was a little bit complex. You want me to do it again? Okay. Sorry, I hit it twice. Look, that was naughty. Hang on. Well, we could play again with these on a bit of a demo later, rather than just, we can actually do it off the command line instead of doing it off pre-recorded stuff. But there are a whole bunch of things which we can now do with this to get us away from just playing back traditional notation, because not everybody thinks of creating their music in terms of what's written on the stave. The attributes that we're setting can be set down to each instrument that you're playing. So you've got global attributes, that's fine, but you can also set them per instrument and start playing around with them. A couple of the things which come up from that, not necessarily, my demos of these are not supposed to be creatively useful, they're supposed to just emphasize what you can do. So we've got 120 beats per minute as a default tempo, and you can set that globally. Or you can set it per instrument. Too fast. Sorry, mate. You know, we can give him all that. Speed up, slow down. Per voice. Now, obviously, when we're going to play that, we're now going to really need markers to help us get him back into sync again a bit later on. But you can do it. And that means that you've got a more complex sound coming out, but hopefully a lot less complex on the notation that you use to get there. This one, yeah, actually having a different key signature per instrument is actually not really a unique feature in the slightest. That looks like a reasonably nice. That tuba was a bit loud there, sorry. I think you're playing flat, mate. It's fine. You might want him to, but not in this example. I put that example up, and Dave came back and he gave me a much nicer one where the key signature sounded beautiful. I was like, I can't hear the difference. I'm not a musician. Can I please keep my old one where it was horrible? He's like, oh, yeah. So I closed that merge request from my slides. Your note lengths, of course, don't have to be in measures and beats for you to go beats per minute, calculate it all out. It's just to hell with it, right? Just go and put them in as actual time if you want to. Seconds and milliseconds are both perfectly valid language for describing your notes. Sorry. I'll do that again without double striking the play button. Sorry. So if you're trying to do something a little bit more electronic music sort of feel to it, where you've got very, very tight timescales to fit things in, specify your notes that way. This one, I'm sorry, the audio demo, I didn't spend enough time on getting a really good demo for it. It didn't work out too well. But basically, stick a bunch of notes into curly brackets and then say how long as a note you want the whole set to be. It will then be distributed into that time slice for you. So in terms of the first line, C, D, E, F, G, and we'll have a rest. Then the C, D, E, F will all be played into a time slice which is, give it its name, I'm damned if I know the names. A minim? Okay, sweet. The next line, we'll put 3 notes into that same space of time. Then we're going to stick another 3 notes into half the amount of time, the fourth quarter note, the crotchet, see, hopefully. But this time, we're specifying the relationship between them. So the C, D, E, the C is going to be longer, the D and E are going to be quicker. It's very complicated to explain. Try listening to it. I'm going to reasonably complex note breaks. But the whole thing is you can put any set of descriptions inside the group. Probably better demoed live. We'll play with a couple of things rather than... He likes the feature anyway. It's something which is quite difficult to put into notation. So that's a nice breakaway. Simple repeats. Just go and say what note you've got, what group of notes you've got, *4, star whatever, and you'll just play them lots of times. I don't know why I put 5 notes in that last repeat group, but there you go. That can keep your code short, especially if you've got something like a big repeated drum line going on, or just you put in the group for it. So Dan, that one, 135 times, please. Done. And then you can just move on and carry on with your code. So that was the good news. The bad news is, it's written in Clojure. That might not be bad news, but it requires a JVM. So Java, the sound font that your computer has by default is absolutely revolting. So we've got all the standard MIDI instrument names that we can play with here. Obviously, what they sound like when they get played back is down to the sound font that you've got installed. He used to distribute Fluid R3 by default. Now he doesn't distribute anything, just lets... What does Ubuntu think that the MIDI electric bass guitar fingers should sound like? It's like the Fluid sound font for exactly the same input. Nice. I am no expert in playback of music, so I do not have any other examples of really nice sound fonts. But if you play with MIDI, I'm sure you've got a way. I do not know how to get this thing to drive real instruments, so don't ask me that one. So, as far as your computer is concerned, just throw it up into read, evaluate, and play loop. And this isn't a live, my mouse has got to go that way. This isn't a live picture, it's just basically just get a prompt, you start typing whatever you want. We'll show you that one in a wee while. And my mouse has to come back over here somehow, get out of that, there we go. While you're in the REPL, you can start doing a few things which interactively you want to do. First of all, we start off with a completely empty, there is nothing happening. I say, what's my map? Bit of JSON comes out and says, well, there are no events, and there aren't any markers at the moment, and you haven't got any instruments. I say, great, okay, can I have a piano? At which point I can start telling it what notes to have. But straight away we start to see all the defaults which are in there, which says, well, currently you don't have any events yet because you haven't put any notes in, you haven't got any markers yet. But now we have an instrument declared. It's got a default octave, you've got all the information there to play with. All right, now I'll put some notes in. Play C, D, E, F, so it will play the notes back so I know what I've typed in. Then ask it what the map looks like. And because it's JSON, we're going to go on for ages here. Which is, yes, there are now some events. So at this offset, there is, on the piano instrument, this note. So we've got pitch and duration. So pitch 329.6 and the duration of 450. That sounds 329 for a C. So he's using, that's concert tuning, not, I looked this one up once because I was going to try and write a score to match a very nice piece of music performed. It was one of Pachelbel's canons. But the best YouTube video I found, I got played, and I was like, I can't match the pitch, I can't match the pitch. And I read then on the comments, the Baroque tuning. Well, I don't know how to change the pitch output, the damn thing, and I didn't want to transpose it all, so I had to give up on that. So I went back to Smoke on the Water, right, which is obviously everybody's second option. So that first event was sitting there, more events. Now, this produces so much output that I'm sat there thinking, I'm sort of wondering, but what's the use of it at this point? But I guess it's a debug. So it's a programming language after all. The implementation, as far as you're running on here, it used to be just one big lump with a massive startup time. So every time you wanted to stop and play a file, you just sit there and wait. It's going to come, it's going to come, it's going to... So now he's split it out into a server backend, which is holding state and running stuff, and a little client front end to send commands. So there, the startup gives us eight and a bit seconds to actually start the whole thing up, thanks Java. And then to send the play command, it's about a second to send the command, and then it starts playing back whatever you're playing back. Separating that front end and back end out is, it may have been practical in terms of getting rid of that startup cost, but if you haven't implemented something in your front end command to go and bring information back, you're stuck. Every now and again the server dies. We'll touch on that one. Then he said you can stick closure code straight into your file when you're stuck. So this only works on, the parser isn't that good at being able to mix the older's own language with closure, but let's put some definitions in. I've defined what my upper and lower pitch I think is going to be, what octave, the durations, and we'll now sit there and tell closure, go and generate some random, right, if you call this function, I'll just go and generate a couple of random numbers, not randomly, because I can tell you all about random numbers till your ears bleed. You're in the wrong mini-conf for that. Pick a note, pick a duration, and then down here it goes back to the electric piano number 1 will play random note 10 times, timpani will play random note 10 times, and then the panning is just setting which side of the audio channel you're going to be on. Obviously, if I played it back live, it would sound different every time, and my recording will sound the same every time. That's the secret of random numbers. Once you've generated them, they are not random, no matter what you do, because you've already done it. So, like some other musician might play, here's my random seed, and this is my... hopefully sounding a bit better than that. But you can put sort of all that arbitrary stuff at the front end for how is it going to generate notes, and then come back to, but now the actual, what's going to do the playback is quite simple and short. I guess it will get there. I listened to that lot, and I thought just to prove that it's shifting from left to right, I run SoundViz on it, Sonic Visualizer, just to say, you can see the left channel is slightly different from the right channel. That represents where the left-right panning has worked properly. Again, playing stereo sound from your laptop, you don't always get to hear the full benefit, so I just visualized it. There's quite a few things that you can't do, that when you ask the question, the answer is, oh yeah, we already have an issue open on that. So when the issue is open, it'll work perfectly. So the first thing I wanted for variables was to say, can I just declare a sequence of notes and give it a name and just keep using that name as a reference? Could be a macro, could be a function call, I don't really care what it is. So as far as he's concerned, it's called variables. They've got a syntax already written out for it. So the idea is you'll declare, yeah, this is the riff, this is the chorus, this is the whatever, and you just keep referring to it on different instruments at different times. It'll do the same thing. And your description of your final bit of music becomes a really, really short, high-level description. That's what you're composing, the details you did earlier. When you're playing around with large numbers of voices and things going on, it'd be really handy to have them all in separate files so you can just play them independently. At the moment, if you want to do a big multi-voice score, you end up putting all the voices in the file at the same time, and it's virtually impossible to say, please only play me one of them. You just got to go and comment out all the ones you don't want and start again, and that's not good. Yeah. So the feature of pulling in an entire section from a modular external file is on its way. Rather similar to that key signature, effectively saying we want to do transposition en masse to a whole group of notes and be able to play them and move them up and down, move them sideways and around. That's coming. It wants to generate its own waveforms rather than relying on the instruments that you're already given from your font. you should be able to, especially with a bit of closure in there, to come back and say, this is actually what I want this one to sound like, and I will completely control all of it. And at the moment, it doesn't output audio to a file in the slightest, because closure's generated the notes, and he's parsed his file and generated the notes, and the JVM's playing it back somewhere. And he's interested at this end, and the somewhere bit was like... So I'm recording all this by firing up Audacity, telling it to pull the monitor of my system sound output, and then promising not to make any other system sounds when I hit play. It records lots of silence, so I don't have any new mail notifications popping up while I'm playing back. So it would easily screw up if I did that. So we'll get the feature of being able to, when somebody figures out how to get this thing to write out to a WAV file, that will be this feature finished. You can't rely on its stability at the moment. Like I said, if you forget which octave you're in and you just sort of play relative, your music will shift up and down. Rather similar to that, if you keep declaring instruments multiple times, sooner or later it just loses sync and says, hang on, how many pianos are we supposed to have? It was the same one, I just declared it 5 times by running from file 5 times. The 6th time you do it, it goes, that's a new piano. That can come when you've all finished. And then you listen to most of your music, and then the bass line suddenly starts up. And you go, I thought it was missing something. So it's not that stable yet. But you restart the back-end server, and then the front-end tool will just go for it. And as he's putting new features in, I'm sure he's going to have to rip out his parser and change the way some of this stuff is structured. There's a few things I've looked at. I think there's probably a better way of doing it that programming languages have solved, that he's not approaching it from that direction. That's fine.
So just one thing I'm not sure I quite understand is if you're writing a long work,
yeah.
Does everything have to be on one? Like, does each voice have to be all on one line?
No, a voice, but it has to be specified in a consistent block of code. I've got a slightly longer example coming up, but basically, but if you try and say at the head of the file, I will write the piano piece for the introduction, and then a bit later on, I'll write the piano piece for halfway through the second verse. It's like it will cope with that. But I get the impression, especially when playing around with it interactively, that if you keep doing that job, eventually it will forget. It will overload something. It will say, we've got more than 16 instruments. They are unique, independent instruments. And then, of course, you hit the general sort of MIDI instrument per channel problem of you can only have 16 of them. So he wants to play around with multi-channels and have it say, or say, can I throw away this instrument now and bring a new one in? So you're almost doing your explicit memory management just to prove he can do it. But inside one file, in theory, you should be able to, well, certainly multiple lines with the same voice, and then use the markers to tie up when events happen later on. So one of the sad things in the music world that's happened is we've lost an awful lot of big musicians recently. While I was away after Christmas, I completely did not hear about Lemmy. And then I heard about Dave Bowie, and I spent ages listening to streaming David Bowie music until I discovered that I like the stuff from the 80s because that's when I was a kid, and I like Ziggy Stardust because that's what my sister listened to. I didn't like any of the rest of it. And then I found out Lemmy was dead. I was like, fantastic, so I can listen to Motorhead like hours at an end because it's all the same and it's just easy. So let's do the Ace of Spades. So I wandered off to MuseScore and I found something done basically for MIDI. Let's copy that. So let's start off. And my sound font is nasty, and I'm going to have to apologize a lot for this. But I have I set my key signature and tempo. With the exclamation mark, it just means it's a global variable. Thanks for having different ways of specifying it, but never mind. So we'll start off, right, there's an awful lot of repetitive stuff there. So the first bass line is going to come in and say, let's go and have a look down here. So, wow, that was vicious, wasn't it? So we'll take this set of notes, long, short, repeat that 3 times, then do long, 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 change note. You'll hear it when you hear it. I haven't got this on its own. But then when you've got those 2 bars, repeat the whole lot 3 times. Then there's just a little riff coming in, and then go back to the same pattern 3 times. Now this is where I obviously want my variables to come in and just say riff with a, and then another. We'll get there. As we come out of that long intro, we start hitting a verse. So I'll just put a marker in for the sake of the other voices that are going to need this. We're going to come into the verse and then start playing some stuff. Again, you repeat a few times and we're finished. There's an electric guitar line at the bottom which waits for 4 bars before it gets started and then comes in lots of chords, reasonably similar pattern. As far as an instrument is concerned, I really don't know that Lemmy is a brassy voice, but there isn't a MIDI Jack Daniels and Cope voice, so you know, amphetamines in his case, I think. And then this is Dave gave me a drum set at the bottom. The equal signs you're seeing there, just say it's a natural note because although it's a percussion instrument, it could pick up the key signature and then completely screw up the instrument you think you're choosing. So this is saying, no, I really do want a C and I really do want an E. They are different instruments. Whereas with everything that isn't MIDI percussion, that's just different pitches. So it had a really good go at this. I was very impressed. There's not much code to produce that. So. We could try Compressor Head. I don't know, anybody know Compressor Head? It's a YouTube video, so I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So in theory, once we figure out how to get from just audio output into driving MIDI, then you could drive Compressor Head using a text editor, which just sounds like that's got to be the way to go. So that's basically where we are, people. That's I found this thing. It looks great. It's obviously got a lot more promise than delivery at the moment, but it's really early on and stuff's happening, and it could be a nice alternative to just doing standard notation stuff. You can do your standard notation stuff, but we're getting many more features now to break out into slightly different ways. Waveform synthesis, getting your own timings going in, cramming notes, and then calling closure functions to go and calculate something new for them. If we could do all that, then we've got a pretty good authoring environment. So that's Alder.
Are there any questions? Otherwise, thank you, Jim.
Cool.